project of the European Union then, and we had to make a model application. And this model application was a copy of the room of the lilies, which is the same orientation, and it was this size. But the architect who had the idea for the whole Vindicaitis, when we made it, he said, well, I think if we leave you with something useless here, it will be a pity. So I will expand it and make it a seminar room. So we have acquired this. And I must let you know that we are sure that we are away from the site with the remains of the city. Here, most likely, there was the sea, because the stratigraphy is very deep and we never reached the layer of pumice, which is in the level of the sea and below. So, that's it. Now, who is chairing?
Is your PowerPoint loaded? No.
I didn't notice that.
I thought you're taking on the whole room.
Here we are. Oh, that was good.
What painting and vase-painting, okay?
This together.
I discovered out sharing the same.
Αγαπητοί φίλοι, καλημέρα και από μένα. Ήθελα να σας πω, όπως ακούσατε και χτες, ότι έχουμε τη δυνατότητα της βιβλιοσκόπησης των εργασιών των χρωστήρων. Ωστόσο, εάν κάποιος επιθυμεί να μην καταγραφεί ψηφιακά η παρουσίασή του, είναι απολύτως σεβαστό. Ο κύριος Καμπανάς δεν θα κάνει την αντίστοιχη εγγραφή. We have been offered the videotaping of all sessions of this workshop. But if for any reason anybody of you wouldn't like to be recorded, please let us know. Okay? Phil, how about you? Okay.
Phil, we should do it in 30s style.
What?
We should do it in a 30s style.
avoided. Kamara's style pottery from Crete is well known. The finest pieces have been excavated from sites in central Crete, especially Knossos, Vestos, and Komos. The date of Middle Minoan 2B has been established for the height of the style. The finest Kamara's ware used red, white, orange, and crimson slips on a dark background to create a very attractive style of decoration. Designs were abstract. Among the motifs were several elements that were inspired from the floral kingdom, including flowers, floral rosettes and half-rosettes, and tendrils that look like curving vines. All of these motifs were flattened and highly abstracted. They were combined in very artificial ways that emphasize design and attractive patterns rather than the natural world. The flowers and other forms inspired from nature are taken out of the natural context and combined in new and artificial ways. They do not grow from the ground. Instead, they create a design of their own. The philosophy of creating a painted design is very different from the use of plants in late Minoan 1, where the plants grow from the ground and create an artistic vision that is still a landscape, even though it is an abstract one. It's taken from a scene of nature. The question this paper asks is, when did this new way of making art begin? Middle Minoan 2B ended with a violent destruction in central Crete. This is Vano 25, the destruction level at Vestos at the end of Middle Minoan 2B. It's typical of the earthquake destructions found across central Crete at the end of the period. The event destroyed and buried buildings, pottery, and objects by the tens of thousands. For workshops making ceramics, it meant that a major need of the communities had to be replaced as soon as possible. And it should be no surprise that the potters were expected to make serviceable pottery fairly quickly, and the length of time spent on decorating Kamara's style vessels was no longer appreciated. The Middle Minoan 3A pottery styles that developed immediately after these widespread Cretan destructions of Middle Minoan 2 incorporated several new ideas, especially in central Crete. For the fresh concepts of the Middle Minoan 3A ceramics involved more than a single concept. Technically, the pottery was less well-fired than the well-made Kamara's ware of the previous period. In terms of style, the potters simplified their motifs, abandoning the complex designs of Kamara's ware that took a long time to paint, in favor of simpler and less flamboyant images that could be executed more quickly. The faster execution allowed them to more easily replace the vast quantity of ceramics that had been destroyed. The pottery painters also began using several new and much more naturalistic motifs. Among the simple spirals, crescents, quirks, and dots were popular images of Middle Minoan 3A. The potters also began adding flowers and other motifs derived from the natural world. One can note the crocus flowers and the lily on this slide. Several pieces of evidence suggest that these naturalistic flowers and other plants were inspired from wall paintings. The rebuilding that occurred after Middle Minoan 2B must have presented an opportunity to enrich the new architecture. A few finds from Galatas indicate that the finest of the Middle Minoan three buildings were provided with monumental wall paintings. The painted plaster pieces from Galatas depicting floral motifs come from a closed Middle Minoan 3A deposit. All the surviving examples are small, but many of them preserve leaves, stems, and other parts of plants. Unfortunately, these pieces are too small to give information on the total compositions. But they do show that monumental wall painting showing plants that grow from the ground were already being made. Among the Middle Minoan 3A pottery motifs are several plants with good parallels from slightly later wall paintings. They include crocuses, lilies, palm trees, and several other plants that are hard to identify, like the ones on this write-up. Both the motif and the style, with the images flattened and simplified to show each blossom or leaf as if it were a flat silhouette, are different from the more abstract pottery of Middle Minoan II, in that the later flowers, plants, and trees have outlines that are closer to those that appear in nature. Individual elements, however, are not sufficient to demonstrate a connection between wall paintings and ceramics. Isolated floral elements do not prove any connection without context. What is required is a pottery decoration that imitates the composition of a monumental wall painting, as well as the individual elements. The comparison is provided by a piriform jar, also called a pitharaki, number C2379 from Komos. The piriform jar was discovered in room CH25 in the central hillside area at Komos. The room contained a closed Middle Minoan 3A deposit that was buried by earthquake. The earthquake buried a number of pottery vessels in addition to this vase, including several pithoi. The jar, with a wide mouth and two vertical handles, was manufactured to serve as a medium-sized storage container. It was 23.4 centimeters high. Because of its wide mouth, the vase had a broad area for painting on the upper shoulder. The details are difficult to see in a color photograph, and they can be much more easily seen in a drawing. The jar has a complex composition. Pairs of white bands define the upper and lower limits of the picture field, and a landscape with palms and flowers is painted across the upper part of the vessel. The image on the jar has many aspects that can be compared with the late Minoan 1A, much later seen from the west house at Akrotiri. The two images are river scenes of a type called the Nilotic landscape. Many of the individual details can be compared closely. Both scenes, for example, have a river. The rivers are shown as if seen from above, broad, sinuous band flowing across the picture field in a generally horizontal manner. The river from Thera can use a blue color to increase the relationship to water, but the potter had no such available color on his pottery, so it is white. There are also palms. The image of the palm tree is also present. In both cases, the fronds are flattened and shown as pairs at the upper part of a thick and knobby trunk. The trees grow upward and bend as if blowing in the wind. A diamond-shaped element is between the upper two fronds on both scenes. There are also rocks. Stripes across them are probably intended to be veins of different colors. When they are next to another element, they are half circles with stripes. There are also plants. They grow near the streams in both scenes. And finally, there is a border to the river. Another element that's common to both scenes. On the painting, it's a contrasting yellow ochre color as a separate line on the vessel. In addition to these individual elements, the composition as a whole also has a clear relationship. In both cases, the painters used curved lines to create a sense of movement, and the trunks and stems are shown as if gently curved instead of straight lines. The spacing against the background is also clearly related, with each plant or rock shown as an isolated and distinct image, separate from its neighbors. This is not the only example of such a composition. A tube-spouted jug from Festos, from the same Middle Minoan 3A period, also has a growing palm tree, other plants, and rocks at the upper border. Fragments from the same period, like this sherd from Komos, shown here, may have included similar details. These river scenes are not really suited to a small jar. They must have been originally created for a larger space. Some of the elements, like the border of the river, which is the bank of the stream, or a border of pebbles or sand, do not work well with the use of only white. On the jar, the entire composition cannot be seen without turning the vessel, and the small area has insufficient room for many details. The composition from Thera, for example, has many rocks and plants near the stream, but the image on the jar from Komos has only a single stone at the river, visible with the slide at the right, and 5 fewer plants. A second example of rock work hangs down from the upper border. These aspects suggest that the derivative, copying and simplifying a scene that was created in more detail elsewhere on a larger surface with more colors available. The importance of the jar from Komos is that it demonstrates that coherent river scenes were already being depicted in Middle Minoan 3A. Flowers, plants, and watercourses were already being combined into coherent landscapes in ways that were typically Minoan. Cretan mannerisms, like the use of curved lines and rich floral imagery, were already being used. One can also suggest that this development probably happened in central Crete, because the new landscapes must have been visible to the potters who copied them. We cannot be sure whether it happened in southern or northern Crete, or in both regions at about the same time. One of the many pottery workshops that copied these developments distributed its products both to the north and to the south. Its products can be recognized by the presence of one unusual detail: the application of details by incising through the applied paint to reveal the color of the clay, shown here in this detail. This group of Middle Minoan 3A vases depicting floral and sometimes faunal motifs can be joined together by the use of this unusual detail for Middle Minoan pottery. The inside lines are scratched before firing into the white paint that is used over the black. The following vessels can be placed in this group. Pythoid jar from Komos, discussed in this program today. Another sherd from the same site of Komos. A conical raitan from Komos. A teapot from Festos. Another sherd from Komos, and an ostrich egg-shaped raitan from Knossos. Palm and floral motifs and rocks are common to all of them. One can also add a jar with thickened rim from Animosphilia at Archanes. All of these vases are pictorial vessels of high quality. They are covered with dark paint and decorated with white floral motifs. Incised details are scratched into the white before firing. A common element with the incising is palms, as the incised lines are used for the fronds of the leaves. The vase from Archanes has a standing bull, as well as floral motifs, suggesting an origin in a pictorial landscape with animals as well as vegetation. The incising is used for the details of the vegetation here. One wonders if the curved lines at the base suggest a river. The vases with pictorial elements suggest that the building phase in Minoan 3a that followed destructions at the end of Minoan 2b encouraged the rapid development of new wall painting styles to enhance the new architecture. Although few examples of these paintings survive, pottery from this period preserves some of the details of the new style. The vases suggest that an appreciation of landscapes was already present and that several of the stylistic mannerisms that would characterize later Minoan and Cycladic styles were already being used at the beginning of Minoan 3. Thank you.
Now, please, here is
problem is I cannot.
Andrea. It's very interesting for me. I'm totally ignorant of the Cretan material. And I think that the fact that all these natural motifs are stylized right from the beginning suggests that there was somewhere a realistic rendering, because I think people start first from the real world and then they try to stylize. I don't know, but it's very interesting. And here we have some hints. Personally, I believe that in Cyclades, naturalism prevails through all the time. So, as we remember this jug with the lilies, which is earlier, we suppose it is earlier than the one painting ring. It's an indication. For here, I think that the pottery prepared the way for landscapes.
On the other hand, if it grows out of commodities, then there's already a tendency for abstraction. That's what it kind of grows out of
Βαγγέλη, μπορείς να μου το γυρίσεις, σε παρακαλώ?
Τι να σου γυρίσω?
Το δικό σου υπολογιστή.
Να σου το φέρω εδώ?
Όχι, όχι, να μου το γυρίσεις, να μου κάνεις conversion για τα βίστα. Αυτό είναι στις πλάστικες.
Sorry, we have been invaded by viruses. Excuse me.
Είμαστε εντάξει. Σε 10 δευτερόλεπτα είμαστε. Είμαστε εντάξει.
Έχει ένα ρόλο αυτό στο κείμενο της. Προτείνω να συνεχίσουμε με το κείμενο του Πιέτρο. Τελειώνουμε. Ωραία. Είναι τα 5 λεπτά που έχετε όλοι χρεωθεί χωρίς να μιλάτε.
But I ask Sancheri, the next person who will be not here will be cancelled. Sorry.
Like Pietro, people who are...
Pietro has sent his paper. All right. But people who are here and not present in this room, I'm sorry, we are wasting our time.
Είμαστε έτοιμοι. Το συνεχίσουμε στο δικό σου Βαγγέλη. Έλα τώρα, συνεχίστε.
Sorry for this delay.
Καλημέρα σας. I will try to speak in English because a text in Greek is also given, so I will try to give it in English so our English-speaking colleagues. I will speak about the category of vases which depict, I think that they depict landscapes. They're not similar to those we had about tomorrow morning. They're with plastic. They have plastic decoration instead. Before this, this is Βρύσσινες, the big sanctuary of Βρύσσινες. Let's not speak about big sanctuaries now.
Πιο δυνατά, η έρευνα δεν ακούγεται. Τι να κάνω?
Το μικρόφωνο είναι για εγγραφή, δεν είναι για μελοφωνική κατάσταση.
I'll be speak louder. At Βρύσσινες, as in all big sanctuaries, a big multitude of figurines is found, human as animal figurines. They are, we think that many of them take part in multi-figured compositions. They must not be thought as individual, but many of them taking part in one representation. The bovines, on top of them, there have been a multitude of pottery, a multitude of sherds. They are two tones more or less, and among them there is a category of vases with plastic decoration, which I'm trying to show you. Like this, they are unattractive. But if you take a little time, you will see that all these appliques pieces of clay may represent small hills and rocks. In this example, they are not so understandable as rocks. I show it to you because it has the rim on top. But in this, you can see the base, the small applique figures that resembles to my mind as rocks. And here you can see, I don't see how could you see, on top the part of an animal.
Το ποδίκι είναι πάνω.
Το φάγε η γάτα.
You can see the part of an animal, the back part of an animal.
It's the top one.
The top one. And this is the one that persuaded me. In the beginning I thought they were flowers, all these rocks. Now, the fact that this little part of an animal is there, I think it is, that said to me that it is not flowers. We have to do with flowers and flowers and animals may be rocks and animals. So this is the proof to my mind. We have this applique pieces of clay, and here we have a small animal, from quite clear fabric, clearer than the rest of the vase. Here is seen from the top, so it means that on top of an applique piece of clay, we have another piece of clay of clearer fabric, which is the last part of an animal. I don't know if I persuade you. So, we have here, this is a very nice vase. We have the base here, the pieces of the shells which could be recognized from the same vase with this applique decoration. We don't have, because the shells have not been recognized, the space between the hills, because the hills are not, there are not only these, the only part of the vase, between the hills are the ground, the walls of the vase. And here I try to make a reconstruction. So, this is a carvos with these protruding rocks. On top of these rocks are often here, for example, animals. We can see that these pieces of clay representing rocks are not even, and they are not evenly distributed. They are trying to imitate the nature. Making the construction of this vase, we had not shards colored, but usually they are colored. We are in the middle of the Kamaris period. They are different, but they are colored again as the Kamaris period. So this is an open vase, again through the same principle, where the decoration is inside the vase. Here they are probably some human, here is a snake probably, and there, here we have a small hill again. They try to make a picture of a landscape inside of it, as in the Palekastro. The Palekastro is the shed. So, the next one is the smaller but the more beautiful. We have a small shell, we could not find others. Here is the small animal, which is very nicely done. Here are the rocks, the two rocks. in the beginning, I thought that the animal is between flowers, but it is between rocks. So this is I tried to make a reconstruction in color. We have the black ground, the white animal, and the reddish rocks. I tried also to make a reconstruction in color. This is the one. It was again the black ground and the reddish. We are in the middle of the Comares period, more or less at the end of middle 2 and beginning with middle 3. There is a big. They are not limited in time. We found them in middle Minoan 2 period and middle Minoan 3 period, but then they disappeared. So I think it is the Vrysenas peculiarity of the Festos region, let's say, of the Comares styled pottery, as it takes his character in the Vrysenas region. So this again a small sherd where there are no hills. But we see the way that the potter is representing the animal. One part of the animal, of course, is not seen, but in the other part, he tries to convince us that it has depth. So you see this semi-attached head and with the two legs, he puts them one in front of the other, trying to show us the movement of the animal and the depth of the composition. So we have seen the scenery, the rocky scenery, we have seen the animals, and now we see the tree. There are some trees, only I have not found a tree on a vase. It is detached. So these are the small branches. They are rendered as knobs, and here again a small animal tries to clean, but very clearly. But I think it is a small animal. Do you see the point? Because this sherd, which I show you, is important from the fact you see the back of an animal again, which is in the rim. You see the rim, the back of the animal, and I think it is important because the rim here is taken as a metaphor of the rock. The animal is climbing. He's climbing in the rock, in the rim. And here we have a very beautiful rock from a big vase. I think it is a closed big vase. Now I try to show you the only representation of a human figure in these vases. So we have here the rocks. We don't have anything after this, but that is the part of the handle. The handle is all around and opaque, and in a point we have a person looking inside, because we see his feet. You see here the feet are represented. This protrusion here is a part of the feet. Perhaps the photograph we try to put it there Perhaps the photograph is not convincing, but we have the two feet, one here and one here. And this part of the handle is this part. So it is the only time we have a person looking inside. So you can imagine all these figurines with all these multicolored vases. And inside this view are also what is inside these vases. I suppose there are fruits, I suppose there are colorful things. Something is inside. All around are bovines, humans, and taking movements and climbing. And I think in our big sanctuaries there are not buildings. It is an open air big sanctuary. But just imagine these 6,000 figurines and all these vases. They are I don't know, 15,000 vases. And these, I don't know, 6,000 figurines. It must be quite an aspect, quite a view of this without buildings. Although these were broken and all around, of course, only 1 year were from year to year they were 90. So I want now to say something about why I call them a landscape. I tried to read a definition taken from the definition of the Florence Convention about what is a cultural landscape. So landscape is a part of a natural world, real or represented, within depicting within a frame, always. A landscape is within a frame, even if you take only photograph, it is within a frame. This is a portrait. So, with some essential features which make this landscape recognizable, easily identifiable, and part of a cultural conception of this part of the natural world. A landscape is not a part of a natural world by itself. It has to contain some recognizable element. For example, if you have an olive tree, a cypress, and a church, and a small church, this is a Greek landscape. Everybody knows this is a Greek landscape. If we have cattle, rocks, and these trees that I show you, you have a Minoan, probably a Minoan landscape. The last thing I wanted to tell you is that the viewer here, as in the wall paintings, is not in the same place. If he's moving, if you see here this, the viewer is in front. It sees the animal in front. If you see this, the viewer is on top. The viewer is flying. He cannot see otherwise. This little animal. The viewer is in two positions. That means that the vase is perhaps moving also. We are we have as artifacts a movable hand. So the same principle is in the wall paintings. We may have a small art, a small craft, but the principles are the same as in the wall paintings. We have seen it before. You can see the trees, the rocks, the birds, view in front, seen in front. But the river and the riverside is as in a mountain. It is seen on top. What I want to say is we may have a small, I try to resist the temptation to call it a popular art. It is not. It is quite beautiful as the most beautiful vases of the Khmer style. but the basic principles are the same as those we see in the landscapes. Here are the monkeys. What we see? The monkeys, the river, here, and the rocks. The rocks from above. This is not clear. They are from above and they are also in front. But a landscape, this landscape is constituted by very few and conceptual features. As we have seen tomorrow morning, a landscape is constituted by the rocks, the space between them, the animals and the trees. It is very, very limited. It is conceptually given as a Greek landscape with some olives and the cypress and the cypress. It is conceptual. It is not, well, it is not imitating reality. In some point, it is imitating reality, but it is constituted by adding conceptual elements. To close my presentation, I would like to tell you that my small ambition is to add the question of perspective in Minoan art, as I showed you before, in the big discussion about if there was perspective in ancient art or not, in ancient and Roman art, in classical wall paintings. There are different points of view. Some people, as the big Panofsky says, that there is perspective, and some deny it. Anyway, what I think with them is that there is a perspective, but not the same in every part of the painting. We have a perspective different, but we have a perspective. So I think that the Minoan perspective may be added to the discussion of this question of the classical perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Iris, for your interesting communication about the comparison between or the representation of the Kamares world in plastic. Thank you. Now, since Pietro Militello is not here,
Yes, Pietro is apologizing for having to stay in Catania because he has been committed, actually, the annual departmental report for the University of Catania. So he apologizes. He sent his communication, and our colleague Vangelis Kyriakidis will read it instead.
Grazie a lei. So, it is well known that Middle Minoan 3 signals the start of a new era in the field of mural wall painting, with the sudden appearance of figurative motifs. The second section is wrong. Many explanations have been proposed for this phenomenon. Renewed contact with Egypt and Mesopotamia, changes in the function of wall painting used in the Neopolitical period as a means of communicating a new ideology, or all of these factors combined. From a more technical point of view, Boulotis and Wahlberg explained the high quality of the first Neopalatial mural painting as a result of the shift of the more gifted vase painters to wall painting, a theory criticized by Blackholmer because of the differences in the use of colors between Kamares painting and Neopalatial wall painting, and by Brisbert for the different module of both arts. In this paper, we would like to return to the problem of the relationship among wall painting and pottery between Middle Minoan 2 and 3, examining craftsmen as the potential agents of this transformation, basing our research on the data from Festos. This is all Greek to be on the right-hand side. I'm afraid this is going to continue for some of the slides. Festos, in fact, but at least we have the English translation of that. Festos, in fact, offers a unique opportunity to study the formative stages of the great Minoan fresco tradition, where, as opposed to other sites, wall plaster of the Middle Minoan period is well preserved. Middle Minoan 2 and 3 Camares pottery is abundant, and new research by La Rosa, Carinci, Girella have created a detailed sequence of pottery deposits from Middle Minoan 1b to Middle Minoan 3b. So, Middle Minoan 2 painting. In Middle Minoan 2, the palace and the surrounding houses demonstrate the widespread use and great importance of wall plaster. The main method of wall and floor facing in this phase, and floor facing in this phase, probably associated with textiles, curtains, hangings, carpets, tapestries. Plaster decorates more than 90% of architectonic spaces, both within the palace and in the house surrounding it. Many of the floors were also painted white, red, or black in earlier periods. The great majority of this plaster was monochrome: white, blue, yellow, red, and black, and a meaningful and symbolic use of colors has been detected. As a consequence, the inner spaces of the southwest quarter clearly indicated to the visitors the main route from the entrance leading to the most important spaces. 51, can you see 51? Yes, 51 is in the middle. Yes, L1. Yeah. 51, 54. Or 55 and 62, the only one with painted decorations, and the secondary route. Can you see the yellow? Okay. Leading to the storerooms. Plaster was also used to mold benches and architectonic elements such as columns. Painted patterns are instead very few and to be found only in a few special spaces, such as the quoted room 51, 54 and room 62. One of the most interesting samples comes from a secondary context, a dump within Kulura 3. Middle Minoan 2 motifs include simple dots, red or white. Sorry, this is wrong. Red or white, and margined lines, a motif whose parallels are to be found especially in earlier MM1A and 1B pottery. Sometimes they could be intended to imitate stone. Irregular lines with very few parallels in pottery. One fragment with a white pointed marguerite, you can see that in the middle, just above Vano 51. And two painted floors. There we go. The first room, 110, with a not clear red motif on white ground. The second is a well-known floor from room 54 with a four-lobed motif. It was in the special intaglio technique to be found also in Knossos. A red filling of a previous carved space in the white plaster. The motif has few and imprecise counterparts in Festos, while the closest cap from Komos, that Betancourt published in 85, and to a lesser degree in a seal motif from Cartier. Both Levy and Blackholmer suggested a textile origin, which is possible, especially in a floor painting, which could represent tapestry or even interplay with two carpets. The flamed curvilinear motif from Kulura 3 reproduces dentate bands of Minoan 2 Camares pottery. Sometimes they are used to symbolize vegetal motifs such as a palm tree. So the possibility cannot be ruled out that the painting represented a tree motif on a wall. The width of the painted area is at least 1.5 square meter and decorates the whole wall of a very important room. The Minoan 3 painting. Situation changes in MM3. After the destruction of the first palace, MM3A early saw the reappraisal of some areas of the palace, the northern court, the central and western courts, but the today visible plan was completed only in MM1B. Gerella identified 3 main phases of MM3A, which help us in dating our wall painting fragments. So, to MM3A early, fragments from Bastioneo West, and rooms 86 to 87, sorry, I'm reading the Latin as well, I'm trying to take some, of the Casa Sud de la Rampa, Casa south of the Ram. Then we've got MM3A mature, in yellow, fragments from the other rooms of Casa Sud de la Rampa, some of the fragments from China Meridionale, and the floor from Halara. And MM3B, fragments from the dump under the room AA and CC, and from China Meridionale, probably from room 46. Again, some Greek. Already in early MM3A, new elements are apparent. The first is the abundance of painted plaster offering tables, concentrated especially in the Bastioneo West and the Casa Sud de la Rampa, and to be used probably in the western court. The second is the introduction of blue in the palette of decorative motifs. Until then, blue was used only for monochrome painting. Finally, a new distribution of painted areas can be detected with the introduction of zonal decoration and decorated bands running at eye height or over the doors, contrasting with the continuous painting of the preceding period. As far as motifs are concerned, dots and irregular lines imitating stone continue patterns of the preceding periods. Strips and bands, a novelty, are characterized by a rich polychromy, still reminiscent of Camara style with brilliant colors, light blue, yellow, orange, red, and black. In MM3A mature, the strips continue and new motifs appear. The foliate band from China Meridionale probably belongs to this phase. It reproduces one of the most widespread contemporary late Camares motifs, one of Cnossian origin. Also, FCM3 and CM4 can be assigned to late Minoan 3A mature. It reproduces a J spiral associated with zigzag or chevron. The single motifs have many parallels in pottery, MM2 seals, and LM1 wall paintings. The overall reconstruction was probably as antithetic spirals. Also, some molded plaster fragments from the area to the south and southwest of the palace can be assigned to the same period. In Halara, a painted floor with a meander has been found. Not only the technique intaglio, which is intaglio, but probably the general plan was similar to the floor of room 54, with a central empty space framed by decorations. Resemblance with the labyrinth fresco from Knossos of Middle Minoan 3A and the maze pattern from Tel El Daba, Avaris, and M1 are only superficial. These paintings were realized through a basic template which cannot be found in our meander, with parallels in older seal tradition, such as the CMS2, Volume 1, 354, that you can see here. Finally, two larger groups of fragments can be dated to Middle Minoan 3B. Both preserve a zonal decoration, framed by bands, including a sequence of rosettes in the first case, and a true landscape with reeds in the second. The rosette motif ran along a border 30 centimeters wide. Parallels are to be found more in preceding vase painting, as the Middle Minoan 2K found by Bernier, or in contemporary wall painting, but not in the contemporary vase painting, where vegetable motifs are now more clumsy. With the fragments of a landscape composition of the Middle Minoan 3B Festos, wall painting enters definitely in the figural language of the Neo-Palatial period, which will continue in the subsequent late Minoan 1A period, and in the decoration of the second palace. To sum up, from an iconographic point of view, in Middle Minoan 2, the monochrome use of colors is sometimes reminiscent of Kamare style in the use of dark hues, but the few decorative patterns have only a looser connection with vase painting and seem to look more at textiles. At the beginning of Middle Minoan 3A, a textile connection is still clear in the meander from Halara, but the link between vase and plaster painting becomes closer, with the introduction of plaster offering tables as a substitute of ceramic shapes, the use of Middle Minoan 2 and 3 motifs, foliage bands, chevrons, spirals, and a tendency to a dark ground. Just a comparison between vase and plaster painting shows, however, the decline of the first. The gap becomes deeper in the following decades, when painting on plaster starts expressing all its potential as a figurative repertoire, with a definitive introduction of complex decorative floral motifs and landscapes. Do we have time for the conclusion? No. No or yes? Of course. Yes. How can we reconstruct the process and the agencies of this deep transformation? In Middle Minoan 2, the picture is of a widespread use of lime plaster, with a systematic research of the intrinsic properties of this material that led to the production of a fabric made of 99% pure lime long before the second palaces, and the exploitation of all its technical possibilities, intaglio, molded, polished, etc. Plasterers should form a specialized group on its own, but were they also the painters? Brisberg correctly highlighted that, as all other crafts, wall and vase paintings are the product of a chaîne opératoire that involves many steps. All in English. Some of these steps peculiar of each technique, but some others are shared by both crafts and could be performed at the same time by the same people in the same area. Pigments were the same, with the exception of blue, malachite or Egyptian blue. Pyrotechnology was common to both. The way of applying color was the same, with brushes. The same cannot be said for the operative chain of other crafts, as carving or weaving. Some of the pigments used in dyeing clothes could be the same as those cited, but the manner and timing of use are radically different, which does not preclude, obviously, the iconographic transference of a motif from one technique to the other. Therefore, and interaction between vase painters and wall painters should be very strong, similarly to what happened between seal carvers and artisans of stone vessels, as demonstrated in Poros, Maya, and in Festos. But we could go even further. The different steps of the chaîne opératoire were carried out by different peoples. It cannot be excluded that even the shaping and painting of some vases were carried on by different craftsmen, as in the Attic production. But it was surely a common practice for the application of plaster and painting to be carried out by two different specialists with different expertise, as shown in the Roman relief of some, beyond obviously information from the Renaissance. For our period, it appears unlikely that the same plasterers painting large monochrome surfaces were able to create the few complex polychrome motifs, and the limited number of specimens makes it difficult to believe that a specialized group of wall painters was in action. It is more probable that when such task was required, this work was left to some of the best craftsmen in the field of the closer and more practiced art, ceramics. Differences in the modules are not a problem in our opinion. The decoration of a fruit stand, like this one, would certainly have required the use of a grid, which would be used to assist reproduction in a magnified form on the wall. Neither the use of textile-related motif is a difficulty. Alongside less innovative artisans, there had to be individuals able to constantly deal with requirements posed by new materials and new situations, like large-scale decoration, and to find even innovative solutions. A wall painter coming from a vase workshop would not simply have been someone who merely transposed ceramic motifs to the wall, but would have forwarded solutions inspired by other forms of art, such as textiles or inlay work. In Middle Minoan 3, a change in the function and evaluation of crafts can be detected. Pottery has no more the same symbolic value of the mature Kamares period. The reasons of this new situation are out of the scope. The reasons of this new situation are beyond the scope of this paper, but can be due to a new strategy of communication introduced by the new elites. In Festos, at a time of economic difficulty, due to the effects of the earthquake and the destruction of the building and the consequent reconstruction effort, attention is shifting now from prestige pottery to wall painting and plaster offering tables, designed perhaps as cheaper substitutes to respectively tapestries and textiles and carved stone offering tables. Some potters were surely in action in this production, and in fact a modern potter from Caltagirone was able to reproduce our prototype of an experimental plaster offering table. Other potters reacted with monumental production, as the pedestal with dolphin decoration. But painting on plaster had a larger potential as a mean of representation. A revolution in iconographic concept of parietal painting, which develops a representative appearance in which a certain role is played by the relationship with Egyptian ideologies. In the meantime, however, extensive use of wall painting has the potential for working on wider surfaces, also following architectural innovations, resulted in the formation of a group of specialized people working exclusively in this field in order to fully develop all the figurative potential necessary to the new needs of a new elite. Grazie a lei.
Thank you very much for undertaking the presentation of and I think it's some interesting points which can be discussed if we have time. But I hope that there will be some time Now, Yumika.
I should apologize for not being here at the beginning. I would like to apologize for not being here from the beginning today. There were some printing problems because I needed to print my paper and there was some problem. So that took me longer than I thought. So I was not here from the beginning. That's why I needed to put on the USB at the moment. So I will start with a special type of pottery and a special type of frescoes of the Middle and Late Bronze Age Aegean in Crete and Thera, which are the two poles on which the discussion will focus. In both forms of art,
speak up please, Mika.
In both forms of art, in clay and in plaster, this doesn't work, and in plaster, there are examples gifted with a decoration which differentiates them from the rest. The applique decoration from Crete and Thera, on one hand, and the applique decoration from Crete and Thera on one hand, and the stucco relief frescoes from Crete and Thera on the other hand, are not broadly discussed objects. Moreover, the features they share have not been studied in detail. A term definition should be added here. Relief work means that the figure that comes out after sculpturing the surface of a vessel is part of it, while the other parts of the same material on the surface of a vessel or a wall is something else, which here is called applique, when for pottery and stucco relief, when for frescoes. It is worth noticing that the examples of pottery with appliqued pottery are very limited in relation to the thousands of clay vases that we know from the Minoan Crete. Clay vases with appliqued decoration appeared in Crete during the beginning of the Old Palatial period. The most characteristic group of vases with such type of decoration comes from Karchemi in Magna, and it is suggested that they bear Egyptian influence. Besides Marriott vases, the next very well-known example is the tubular vase with the appliqued seal-well decoration from the old palace of Festus, among which the appliqued clay dolphin is unique. The appliqued decoration on clay vases continued to be in use until the end of the Bronze Age in Crete, while after the late Minoan III period, the examples become even less. The theme changes, and perhaps the symbolism they carry changes also. Applique decoration is something that was common on the bases from sites in the East, in Egypt rather, than in Crete and the Aegean. The vase on which we will focus our study at the moment is a small jug from the dump with pottery outside the house in Knossos. The jug was found intact, and the upper decoration covers the most part of one side of its pear-shaped body. The uplift motif of the three barley sprays on the shoulder of the vase is accompanied with uplift garlands in horizontal and vertical way, and the rest of the body is covered with series of spots of white added paint. The decoration is set on a black burnished background. This background burnish and the rather raw surface dated in the Middle Minoan 3B period, while its orange, clean of enclosing fabric is purely Gnossian. The lack of context makes the assumptions about the function of the jug difficult, and we can only argue on the use of the decoration as a label for the definition of the context, which according to Evans was beer. It is of great surprise to see an almost identical vase in form and decoration from Akrotiri, Thήρα. The surprise grows bigger when we mention that this particular jug is the only ceramic example with applied decoration among thousands of clay vases found at Acrodiri since 1967. The type of the vase is the same with the Gnossian one, although the upper part of the shoulder and the mouth of the jug are missing. The form of the body and the base are enough to show that the type of the vase is a Thera imitation of the Gnossian jug, while with these two vases we can summarize the discussion of the way the Theran potters were imitating the Cretan potters. Most part of one side of the Theran jug, on the upper part of the body, is covered with three applied bunches of grapes, and all around them also applied garlands of spray. The Theran example is painted like every other vase of local fabric, while the imitation of the applied decoration points directly to Knossos, since from there it was its prototype. How did this happen, though? Obviously, the Theran potter had seen the Gnossian jug in Knossos and had the time to look at it carefully in order to make a copycat after his return to Thήρα, but changing the plan that was depicted on it. Nothing similar before that and nothing after that in the mature late Cycladic I period emphasizes even more its importance as a unique example of a bottle for wine. Regarding the iconography of both vases, the idea that Evans suggested cannot be excluded. It is possible that the applied barley and grape bunches were acting as labels for the content of the vases they decorated. They are perhaps associated to the iconography of a group of large spherical jugs from Akrotiri, which depict nipple ewers on them alternating with grape bunches. For them too, the suggestion of labeling is potential. There is one more example of an applied motif, which is a large of local Theran fabric found from the Ephoria excavations, the Ephoria of prehistoric and classical antiquities, at the Kamas mine, which bears an applied carving shell on the upper part of its body. The dexterity, or rather the specialization of the potter, should be discussed because it is not easy to add complicated figures of various levels of sculpture on a carved surface like a vase. Therefore, beyond the difficulties of the painted decoration, the small-scale sculpture of clay on clay and the three-dimensional sense that these figures created should be treated differently. It must be noted that the figures which are made separately and then applied on the carved surface by the hand, it is difficult to have the same or a similar analogy in their dimensions. For clay, one-sided, shallow molds for attached decorative patterns were found during Harriet Boyd's excavations at the New Palestinian settlement of Lunia House CP, which shed some light on this question, showing that the assumption for the use of a mold for such a representation is not far from real. There should be a definition here regarding the low and the high applied decoration on clay bases. The repetitive stamped patterns are of low relief and they might be the outcomes of a mold, while the patterns of sculptural work are not repetitive and they are usually combined with patterns of secondary importance. Perhaps it was the plasticity feeling that is mostly sensed between the hands when someone is carrying such a vase, and is the same that is created to a blind person who touches a work of art and feels the details. On the whitish fabric of the Theran jug, the applied decoration is formed by three bunches of grapes.
knight with oblique garlands and spots of white-added paint on the most part of the body. The jug was found in a stratigraphic trench 33 in site 65 when the large project for the replacement of the roof of the site was on. The vase is dated to the early late Cycladic I level of the building 65, and this is also the period when the building was founded. Probably the vase was originally part of the equipment of the ground floor rooms. Unfortunately, this particular building is not fully excavated yet. This context shows no evidence of religion, so the decoration should also be interpreted as a label of the content, which in this case would have been wine. The barley of the Gnossian jug and the grapes of the Theran one are so similar to each other that the depicted species can hardly be identified. The oblique decoration vases consisted of figures of various forms categorized as follows: plants, animals, birds, mythical creatures, objects, seaworld, parts of mountains, human figures, decorative curvilinear motifs. The commonest are the plants and the animals. Now, when discussing the form of artistic iconography, which is not only painted, it is equally important to discuss the way this was made, and through that, the iconography will be better understood. To my opinion, and after having discussed the problem with conservators, which are also potters, the most part of this type of decoration must have been done by the use of the mould, while the secondary details might have been by the bare hands of the potter. It would be impossible for a human hand to repeat an identical figure without the aid of another medium. Moving now from the small to the large scale of sculptural art and plaster, we will discuss the stucco relief frescoes in Crete and Thήρα. The large-scale stucco relief frescoes appeared for the first time in Crete, in the end of the Old and the beginning of the New Pelasian period. Here it should be mentioned that Evans dates the oldest group of stucco relief frescoes from the east wall of Knossos in the Middle Minoan 3A period, but their iconography does not agree with such an early date. Obviously, Crete was the motherland of the Aegean art for these types of frescoes, since there are quite a few examples over there. Scant examples of fragments with stucco relief decoration are known from Tel el-Daba, Patna, and El Kabri, which are enough to prove that the technique of making stucco relief frescoes was not an Aegean privilege. The sculptural, three-dimensional feeling that these frescoes created to the spectator is much more obvious than it is with small-scale clay vases with oblique decoration. The question is why the fresco artists spend more time and consume more plaster in order to create a limited number of stucco relief frescoes, while the painted frescoes were also in use. There must have been a reason to create such works occasionally in small numbers. It is also interesting that the stucco relief frescoes are a combination of relief and flat surface painted parts. The stucco relief parts are always the parts either of a human or of an animal body, while the head of the humans and the surroundings are painted, and the head of the animals is in stucco relief and the surroundings are painted. All the scholars who have dealt with the stucco relief frescoes agree in the part of the sculptural feeling that these figures show, and that the artists of these frescoes paid much of attention to the human anatomical details. The scaling from flat painted surface to high relief in the stucco relief fresco increases the glyptic sense that the image presents. Besides the red charging bull, the green olive trees, the blue garment of the skirt of the two seated women from Thήρα, most of the times the stucco relief frescoes were depicting the white plaster in relief, either when the scene was pictorial or when it was geometrical or abstract. The majority of the examples in the variety of themes come from the Palace of Knossos and its surroundings. The monumental charging bull stucco relief fresco from the tower of the northern entrance is surrounded by a natural landscape with olive trees also depicted in stucco relief. While in the south front, the famous king priest was found. Both find spots are related to the entrances of the palace and the impression the constructors wanted to create in the eyes of the visitors of the palace. From the restored east wall comes a series of fragments of stucco relief frescoes with parts of muscular male bodies, two pairs of standing winged griffins tied in columns, two female breasts, bodies of female bull leapers, and part of the mane of a bull. According to Evans' reconstruction, the stucco relief frescoes were covering all four walls of the room. The scale is more or less similar in all the fragments. If there was the one scene with bull-leaping and athletes' boxers, then this would have been the only bull-leaping scene in stucco relief known so far. Besides the griffins and the charging bull, all the other examples are of human figures, men and women. So it is possible that we have a pattern here. We will not discuss the gender of king priest, but we will discuss it the way it is now exhibited in the Heraklion Archaeological Museum as one figure. The hieratic and palatial static posture of this figure is, I think, beyond any doubt, while it also preserves the best example of scaling stucco relief if someone looks on his crown. The only other palace with an example of stucco relief fresco is Zakros, with a running spiral frieze on the upper part of the wall in the banqueting hall of the western wing. Judging by the religious feasting function that is given to the room and its adjacent ones, and the symbolic role that Juncker Masset sees in the running spiral friezes, then the Zakros spiral frieze must have been something more than a decorative zone. Besides the relief frescoes which were decorating the walls of the Palace of Knossos, there is a unique stucco relief frescoed ceiling which would have been originally in a basement room connected to the East Hall. The running stucco relief spirals enclose quatrefoil medallions with large rosettes in their centers attached at intervals to the surface. The next important group of a stucco relief fresco with two-seated women comes from Thera, building AC, and sporadic fragments come from Palekastro, three houses over there, Prasas, Zominthos, and Archanes. Additionally, according to Chapin, there are fragments of stucco relief frescoes of large-scale female figures from Chania and Katsabas. Kaiser adds Aggiatriada and Gournia in the list. There is a contradiction here that needs to be emphasized, and this is what we call the stucco relief frescoes as an expression of hierarchical and palatial way of life. But what about the examples that come from other buildings which do not have a palatial character? In Knossos, Prasas, Zominthos, Archanes, and Palekastro, such frescoes were found in houses. What then would be their role in a house, since in there they would not service the needs of the palatial society? The buildings where these fragments belong are not classified in the type A of the Minoan villas. Therefore, we should accept that there was a second-class workmanship of stucco relief frescoes which would be affordable for the private household. The iconography does not change, and the fragments repeat the palatial rule of depicting parts of the human bodies in stucco relief. What it would be worth examining would be a technical comparison of those plasterworks and the palatial productions in one hand, and an iconographic comparison for the quality of the execution of the depicted thing. Building AC in Thήρα has been interpreted as a shrine. The finding of the relief stucco frescoes in room AC6 is perhaps indicative of such a function. If these two women could be interpreted as being in a dialogue to each other, then they remind us of other similar scenes of Sacra Conversazione on frescoes. In them too, the body is of stucco relief, while the background is a flat surface. Parts of the rockwork which are preserved show that here we have an example of stucco relief landscape, and perhaps can be interpreted as the natural continuation of the seated body, which at the point it was quite high stucco relief. Evidence of the technique of these frescoes comes from a track from the Palace of Knossos, which preserves a rectangular hole for the wooden peg that would have held the stucco relief part on the wall. In the fragment with the female breasts, also from Knossos, the multiple layers of plaster are visible, along with traces of scoring for the better attachment of the above layer of plaster. As for Akrotiri, the only known example of a stucco relief fresco so far is the large synthesis of a repetitive abstract motif. Two walls of the second floor room 9 of Chesty 3 were covered, as Plachopoulos argues, with clusters of yellow and blue rosettes inside relief lozenges against a red background. There is also a fragment of a stucco relief fresco with a part of the blue rosette and a part of a stucco relief white border, which was found in one of the stratigraphic trenches for the construction of the new roof of the site. It is worth noticing that the percentage of stucco relief frescoes is less than 1%. In comparison, to the wealth and variety of frescoes that have been preserved at Akrotiri. By taking as the fact of the religious / symbolic character of the frescoes in this building, then why the relief frescoes should be an exception? The Brutus is broadly accepted as having a symbolic role in Minoan Cycladic religion. There are scholars who suggest that the pictorial Middle Cycladic pottery and the Middle Minoan polychrome camares were the predecessors of the monumental frescoes of the late Minoan I period. Others will argue that the monumental relief frescoes were the source for the glyptic art on seals, ivory, and metal. But what about the small-scale clay vases with applique decoration? Where would they be standing in this timeline? Were they the beginning of all the above? We do not have enough evidence to prove the direct connection of the late Minoan I stucco relief frescoes and the Middle Minoan clay vases with applique decoration, but what it cannot be disputed is that the treatment of the surface and the visual illusion effect play an important role in both cases, although in different scales. The curved surface of the vases and the flat surface of the frescoes were the drawing board that would be decorated with an additional piece of the same material. Therefore, the horizontal and left-right zonal surface filling would be the natural way for the surface treatment. The idea of making friezes was also usual, simply because it was something familiar to the artist. In that sense, we can argue that the clay vases with applique decoration are the predecessors of the stucco relief frescoes. The sculptural, three-dimensional sense that the vases with applique decoration created to the spectator feels the same when someone looks to a stucco relief fresco. And now, do you have like maybe 1 minute for just an experience description?
Yes.
Okay. During an event of the opening of the archaeological site of the Palace of Knossos, during the full moon of August in 2012, a fellow archaeologist visited the site, and the next day, when she was describing her experience, she said that the replica of the charging bull fresco on the northern tower was visible from the central court, even under the moonlight, and seen in a certain angle, it was creating the illusion of movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. So we have another lot of information about applique pottery decoration as compared to relief wall painting decoration. Now, let's
Although the arts of Neopalatial Greece are strongly characterized by liveliness, creativity, and a certain freedom, we have to bear in mind that there existed only one Minoan art which was remarkably homogeneous in character. Thus, we are unable to make a distinction, for instance, between a Central Cretan and an East Cretan style, or a Cnossian and a Phasian iconography. And this applies to all artistic media representing figurative scenes from MM3 until LM1B and possibly beyond. Nowadays, it is out of the question that by the Neopalatial periods there existed a vivid cross-fertilization of interacting artistic media and ideas. This, however, was not a game without rules. In fact, we can detect several principles and a hierarchy of dominant artistic genres, whereas others possessed a merely passive, imitative character. This point is remarkable insofar as the situation in the preceding periods appears to have been quite different. Among the arts in Proto-Palatial Crete, largely varying regional and workshop styles can be clearly detected. For example, in figurative scenes on painted pottery and on ceilings from the Archivio di Cretule et Festos, on clay relief vessels from the Gatia Mu at Mallia, as well as in many other dispersed examples from Proto-Palatial Cretan sites. The situation basically changes in the early Neopalatial periods. when Janice Crowley, in her recent book on neopalatial seals, talks of a Minoan high art, we have to qualify that by this period there can hardly be detected a non-palatial, private, unbounded iconography as an alternative to what we are used to calling Minoan art. Although format, scale, complexity, expenditure, style, and quality of Minoan images can vary, the iconographical conventions, basic stylistic features, and the motifs themselves appear remarkably uniform and points to a widely coordinated and centralized production of artistic concepts. However, when going deeper into questions of iconography, composition, and style, a fundamental dichotomy among Minoan artistic media can be observed. There is the basic difference between major and minor relief arts, including seals on the one hand, and painting on a flat wall and on clay vessels on the other hand. Although Minoan relief arts, as you can see here and Mimic has shown you before, encompass a large variety of materials and techniques, the artistic necessities and possibilities for shaping a figurative scene are closely intertwined. Artistic conventions of plasticity and surface treatment, as well as the mostly plain background of a relief scene, have only occasionally been surpassed. Very similar principles can also be observed in seal cliptic and on metal rings. By combining relief and painting potential, stucco relief images constituted more or less the only monumental and undoubtedly the most sophisticated art form of Minoan Crete. In this respect, the extremely poor state of preservation of this material, which mainly comes from the Palace of Knossos, should not make us underestimate its originally first-class quality. When studying the earliest examples of complex representational motifs in Minoan pottery dating to MM2B and to 3A, we notice that they are mostly produced in molded relief, such as on this vessel from Malya, which is dating slightly later. Although some motifs obviously were borrowed from seal stones, in the majority of examples, relief compositions in the form of friezes constitute a much better candidate. This strongly suggests a leading position of the large-scale stucco relief friezes in the formative period of figurative images already in early Neopalatial Crete. At least some indications exist which reinforce the assumption by Bernd Kaiser that, I quote, the Minoan stucco relief emerged not as a curious offshoot, but from the beginning constituted the most sophisticated form of mural decoration, end of quote. This hypothesis is also supported by the fact that the compositional structure of several better preserved relief vessels dating to LM1 was largely unsuitable for being executed in small size and on the wall of a circular vessel. These vessels rather lead us to postulate large-scale mural reliefs in form of extended register scenes as the prototype of this iconography. This is strongly suggested by examples such as the battle crater from shaft grave 4 at Mycenae. Although this relief image adorns a silver vessel, the iconography of two antithetically posed groups of warriors becomes clear only when unrolled to a frieze, as you see here in the center. The postures of the 9 figures depicted present close analogies to motifs on Minoan seals, as well as in other images. They thus permit us to perceive them as standardized iconographical topoi, which could be presented as isolated and interchangeable figures, or even also combined, in order to create a variety of battle-related scenes. It is the complex choreography of this relief image, together with further minute details, which allow us to postulate a large-scale relief frieze, probably in stucco relief, serving as the prototype of different versions of this battle scene. Another example which very well demonstrates the fact that large-scale relief friezes on architectonic walls constituted the model for larger iconographical contexts on vessels are the 2 Minoan gold relief cups from Baffior, whose images are clearly correlated one to the other in respect of composition. The 6 vignette-like motifs and their numerous parallels in other artistic media strongly support the existence of some kind of pattern books in Neo-Palatial Crete. In any case, these and further examples clearly demonstrate active artistic interconnections among the relief arts of Neo-Palatial Crete, and suggest a predominant leading position of the monumental stucco relief compositions of Knossos, although this last claim can hardly be substantiated through actual finds. In contrast to the majority of relief arts, Minoan fresco painting on a flat plaster surface enabled the rich and versatile facilities of polychromy. By its confinement to the artistic language of line and color, Aegean wall painting allowed for the depiction of figurative scenes in a broad range of compositional forms and dimensions, from miniature friezes to megalographia. Moreover, painting facilitated a more flexible, spontaneous, and experimental operation than the thoroughly planned relief arts. Thus, Minoan painting on the flat wall was the less exclusive artistic medium with simpler technical requirements. It was also more flexible than the stucco relief. As a consequence, motifs of Minoan relief art could be painted also on a flat wall without causing major problems, whereas this was not the case in the opposite direction. In the throne room frescoes from Knossos, for example, the ornamental hatchings along the contours of the griffins could well imitate stucco relief plasticity by subtle painting methods, suggested already by Sarah Immerwahr. From a survey of Minoan mural painting on a flat wall surface, it becomes clear that they feature in part artistic principles as well as thematic and iconographic motifs, occasionally contrasting those of stucco relief images and minor relief works. The imitation of veined stones, the creation of background zones of contrasting colors, which are divided by wavy lines, and other landscape motifs could hardly be achieved in non-polychrome images, although irregular rockwork motifs occur also in three-dimensional form in relief images. When John Younger suspected that seal stones hardly ever copied frescoes, and Maria Shaw drew the conclusion that the iconography of mural paintings probably lacked several themes of seal cliptic, this fits well with our observation, given the strong relations between seal images and other minor and major relief arts. Furthermore, in contrast to the large-scale stucco relief images in the form of register scenes, Minoan mural painting enabled the depiction of extensive landscape scenes in small or miniature scale, such as in the case of the miniature frieze from the West House at Akrotiri. The topography and spatial relation of Town 4 can be translated in a logical and coherent sense, as you can see here in this drawing. Comparable extensive landscape scenes with small-scale figures occur in Minoan stone and metal relief vessels from Knossos, Mycenae, and other sites, but they were largely impossible to produce in monumental stucco relief. As for the functions and meaning of relief arts and painting on Minoan murals, they could well have been more or less identical. However, as Janice Crowley conclusively observed, Minoan seal cliptic often contains images of a sort we find in monumental relief and sculpture of the ancient Near East. And in my eyes, this applies also to other minor and major forms of relief art in the Aegean. Moreover, there probably existed also a distinct hierarchy of relatedness to the Palace of Knossos. In contrast to the rather hieratic character of the monumental exclusive stucco relief friezes, the less standardized, sometimes individual iconography of Minoan wall paintings may have possessed per se a less official, slightly subordinate position. In Akrotiri, mural decoration is not only mostly well preserved, but also possibly presents an overabundance of figurative scenes. As I've argued in my paper at the Wall Paintings of Thera conference in 1997, we received the impression that figural painting at Akrotiri occur also in humble room types where we do not expect to find them in comparable houses in Neopalatial Crete. Moreover, in Akrotiri, simple forms of room decoration, such as walls and floors painted in red, as well as the exclusive stucco relief, are almost completely lacking. A stucco relief fragment from an older wall decoration of the House of the Ladies probably shows the parallel seams of the oxhide covering of a large-scale body sheet. Here. Yeah. If my interpretation is correct, there's also a relief plaster fragment of the curved border, possibly of a shield, in the exhibition in the Prehistoric Museum at Thήρα. Interestingly, the parallel seams on the plaster fragments are given in the conventional Minoan manner and contrast the purely decorative version on the figure of 8 shield on a local bithoid jar from Akrotiri. See here on top. Thus, during the Neopalatial period, mural decoration, be it in stucco relief or on a flat wall, could have possessed a more standardized character than pottery decoration on the Minoanized islands. Let me close by presenting a further observation on the general position of pictorial pottery. During the Palatial era of the Bronze Age Aegean, it was only in the Proto-Palatial period of Crete that pottery constituted the leading and most creative artistic medium, and this was largely restricted to ornamental decoration in Kamara style. When representational scenes first appear on Cretan pottery in the later stages of MM2, they essentially appear in relief. As mentioned before, their prototypes can be identified in seal images and possibly also in early stucco reliefs. Thus, clay vessels with their curved walls, seemingly unsuitable for the depiction of larger scenes, became the predominant and most creative iconographic medium only when they served more or less as the unique artistic genus. From late Bronze Age 1 until 3B, the iconography of pictorial pottery appears to imitate and simplify. It is probably no coincidence that both prominent examples of relief friezes mentioned before find their iconographic parallels even in post-Neopalatial vase painting, when Aegean relief arts had considerably declined, with some exceptions, of course. The warrior in a lunch, as represented on the paddle crater from Mycenae, is attested on LM2 jug from Knossos, here. While it is very likely that the pictorial crater from Encomi echoes the iconography of the gold relief cups from Vafiol. The iconography, not the cups themselves, of course. It was probably not earlier than LH3C, during the post-Palatial period, roughly seen yesterday, that vase painting became the predominant artistic medium again, although iconographical themes such as warrior scenes, dance, and even prophecy scenes occur already in the Mycenaean Palatial period. Given this fact, it is no wonder that the pictorial pottery from the late Middle Cycladic period, with its astonishing iconography, fits well this artistic position of vase painting in Aegean Bronze Age, probably representing more or less the only autochthonous artistic medium in the Cycladic islands during this period. These vessels combine highly inventive and experimental motifs and Minoanizing iconography in an individualized way without possessing any successors in this or another art genre. To summarize, in the Minoan world, relief art and painting cultivated a complicated, unequal partnership. In Neopalatial Crete, seal and relief images only sporadically show clear correspondences to paintings on a flat wall, and probably instead possessed much closer ties to its taller brother, that means the stucco relief, although there exist numerous exceptions to this rule, as you can see here in these examples together. When Hagen Pisans in 1954 characterized the iconography of the gold ring from Galivia here as wie mit dem Pinsel hingehauen, means like sculpted with the paintbrush, On the one hand, he was correct in recognizing the painting qualities of Minoan, seal, glyptic, and Aegean art in general. On the other hand, in the majority of complex iconographies, it appears more reasonable to postulate the monumental stucco relief friezes in the Palace of Knossos as the original formative medium, whereas Minoan fresco painting on a flat wall surface often featured an autonomous, rather subordinate character. As an iconographical medium, pictorial pottery possessed an important position only in random periods of the Aegean Bronze Age. That means in regions and societies which were not yet dominated by or had loosened their ties to palatial art that primarily consisted of relief images. Thank you.
Just informed that the first paper of next session, Angelias Papagiannopoulou, who unhappily she is not with us today, it will be distributed, so we have time to have a discussion. So, sorry? Yes, sure. After this discussion, please. Yes. Ναι, θα κάνουμε συζήτηση για λίγο, γιατί όλοι από ό,τι καταλαβαίνω πολλοί διψάνε, άλλοι πιθανώς πεινάνε. Λοιπόν, I think that the entire session was a kind of battle or cooperation between the paintbrush, the chisel, and the mold. So, whether should we discuss the whole session together? I think it is more convenient since there was a connection. Christo.
I am very happy to do a compact thematic session, and that's really a great problem, the genesis of Minoan fresco and the expansion, and especially the interconnection between several kinds of art. I think that the role of Camara style and the post-Camara style for the arise of Minoan representative and figurative frescoes were very, very important. Then, of course, between Camara, and I think also that we have perhaps to search to identify the first Minoan painters, real painters, not just brush users of the old Pallas period, in the last years. Yes, in the last
Boyadzίδες θες να πεις.
the last Camaras or post-Camaras painters quite familiarized with the polychromy. Of course, the technique in the use of colors is different, but the most important is that the common point is the use of iconography and all the designs and
The dowry.
yes, and of course, and the Professor Betancourt μας έδειξε the incision, even the incision of this river landscape on a vase, and this is a more typical characteristic for plaster painters, and I think also that what Krieger und also Fritz
Next year. Next year.
The plaster, the appliqué period, with practically a combination of relief and painting, can be as intermediate indicator for this Minoan tradition comes into the fresco. Of course, again, we have a different technique than in the appliqué periods. We have to do with morbid period, and on the contrary, in the stucco reliefs, we
build up gradually.
Layer. But really, the subject is very complicated, and we have several approaches to subject, and surely the mechanism is much more complicated of this thematic interrelation, interconnection than we suspect. But
well, since none of us was there present, you are entitled to say whatever you like. No. Prof. Thank you, Nano. I think you raised an interesting point, and perhaps sometime in the future, I don't know whether long or near, we'll have to discuss about chronological terminology, because we are confused. I don't mean chronology, because then they will have no end, but chronological terminology. Yes, Irini. Δυνατά.
Representational motifs. But I think
Yes. But you call them heirlooms, but I think after a destruction, people survive and carry on their culture. And of course, their knowledge is never lost. That's why we have development and progress. But also, do not forget that here we have in the late phase of the city, the last phase of the city, late mid-Cycladic pottery, almost complete. I wouldn't say it is heirloom. It has survived the previous earthquake and was kept in function. But of course it will be difficult to say if we have a gap. But the problem is that we have not good and convincing stratigraphic evidence for all this, and this is one of the desiderata. Yes.
I'd like to make a point for continuity outside the realm of pottery, which is very, very fragile, easily broken by earthquakes. We're probably looking at styles which were also present in wood carving,
Yeah.
basketry, especially in leatherwood.
Yeah.
That regarded the objects that were imported from Crete are largely leatherwood.
Mm.
Minoan leatherwood must have been a very, very important item. It's not destroyed by earthquakes.
Yeah.
It will continue and bridge the gap.
Yeah. Vangelis.
Just a very obvious point. For the information period, we saw an incredible density of iconography that is spread not only in palaces but also in iconography. Also, the impression this incredibly prevalent iconography everywhere, from rings, pottery, wall paintings, to whatever, leatherwork or
Basketry or weaving.
must have been incredible. And this just makes me think of a few repercussions for this. First of all, science is not everything. And so when we're talking about a comparison between, let's say, Cretan palaces and Near Eastern palaces, we should not forget this incredible impression, this extremely high quality art which have made the non-Minoan or non-Aegeans when they saw these buildings from the inside. The second thing is how large that market must have been, the market of people with extraordinary good skills in making these things. That market must have been enormous. So enormous, I doubt that this could be controlled entirely by palaces. And we have seen many palaces in this island that have got extremely good quality art and are nowhere near palatial buildings. And so I would just, the third point I just want to make as a repercussion of all this is that when we compare the old palace with the new palace, and we generally have a tendency of saying old palace, extremely good quality, new palace, industrialization, good quality. So old palace, big, good construction, thick walls, old palace, new, thin walls that are very fragile. Old palace, extremely high quality pottery, new palace, much poorer quality pottery. But if we see this in this context, where everything is poorer in the new palace, everything is so much more impressive, I think the new palace still seems to be more impressive and seems to be giving weight to other new forms of art. And
and to satisfy new concepts of the society. Now, if you look today, if you compare the traditional houses of Santorini with 1 meter thick walls because they had to support the vault, and the modern ones with concrete, you see 20 centimeters thickness is not a sign of poverty and degeneration. Yes, any other? Yes, Marisa? Higher up.
Another subject. Congratulations to all the speakers. And I would like to draw attention to a very important identification that this platform has made, and which I think would be crucial for all our discussions, is identify the piece, the early piece, which comes from the
Yeah. Is it a fresco or a Yes, no, I mean the figure of 8 shield you showed is not fresco. Is it fresco? Yeah. No, λέω γιατί μιλάω για αυτό το είδα, I thought it was. Όχι αυτό, μιλάω για την. Yes.
These lines could be represented on the fresco as well.
Yeah. Yes. Για δείξω, γιατί εγώ έχω αντίρρηση σε αυτό.
Where's that?
Ναι, okay. Here. Here. This LM1 up
Right.
from Tilissos is a clay model, is it? And ivory. Okay. Yeah.
Of course, this is a very early piece, but I find, the Akrotiri fragment of fresco because it has been found in the seismic destruction level, not in the volcanic destruction level, in the life well of the house of the lake. From the same house, there is another old piece that came in life. It is a piece of unique fresco, similar to the one of the Sextuple, it came from the floor of the first floor of the house of ladies. So these two pieces are actually very important to understand the history of frescoes in Akrotiri. But of course, this identification could be very, it's a very successful activity. It could be successful, I don't know. Even if it is a later piece, this is not finished. Anyway, the subject of the shield is quite the same in many different media, as far as the presentation goes. So I think this is a very important point.
I must make a comment on this so that you can reply. You said this is of ivory. Η οκτώσχημη ασπίδα. Yes. No, I mean, if one thinks that this was a copy of a clay model, these lines could be just for the better firing because it is a handle. That's why I say, well, I had this, when I saw it first, I had this idea.
σε όλες τις τοιχογραφίες
Ναι.
είναι κόκκινο, είναι ένα λειτουργικό στοιχείο στην κατασκευή της ασφύρας. Απλώς εγώ θα ήθελα να πω σε όλα αυτά που ακούσαμε that we can underline the role of the palace of Knossos in the neo-palatial period in the political geography of Crete. We see a change in this political geography, and Knossos is the center of the fresco practice on the stucco relief, and the best artifacts, the preciosa of the period, the stone reliefs with narrative scenes and the best golden symmetry and seeing come from Knossos. And I think that Knossos is the ligno, also
The cradle. Cradle.
of very sacred Minoan iconography, and especially in the new palace period and the symbolic. And this expansion of this symbolic, I think, that is the role of Knossos, then religion is the best ultimate vehicle to exercise authority.
I have given, there was a sign that time is over. Sorry, we have time to discuss either privately or later.
Ζώζη, η Μαρίζα και η Ειρήνη, παρακαλώ τις προβολές τους. Θα ήθελα να σε ενημερώσω ότι θα κάνουμε ένα μικρό διάλειμμα για τα όρια της αντοχής.